The sound of $3,000 worth of vintage crystal shattering against Italian marble didn't just stop the music, it sucked the oxygen right out of the room. In the gilded ballroom of the Sterling Art Museum, 200 of the city's wealthiest elites froze, their champagne flutes hovering halfway to their lips, their eyes locking onto the disaster in the center of the floor. Standing over the mess was Alistair Sterling, a billionaire whose cruelty was as legendary as his bank account. His face twisted into a sneer of pure, unadulterated disgust. At his feet, trembling in a puddle of spilled Chardonnay and broken glass, was Maya, a black woman in a gray maid's uniform who had simply been trying to do her job. But Alistair didn't see a human being. He saw a stain on his perfect evening. He didn't just want to fire her. He wanted to break her for the sport of it. With a kick that sent a shard of glass skittering against her knee, he silenced the murmuring crowd and made a proclamation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You clumsy, incompetent embarrassment!" he bellowed, his voice booming off the vaulted ceilings. "You ruined my toast, so now you will provide the entertainment. I'm going to make you a bet. If you can stand up and dance this waltz better than my fiancée, a woman of actual culture, I will give you $50,000 and my son's hand in marriage. But when you fail, and you will fail, you will crawl out of this building on your hands and knees." He laughed, a dry, ugly sound, expecting her to beg for mercy, but he missed the moment Maya's trembling stopped and her hands curled into fists. The moment the victim decided to become the executioner. Maya Brooks had learned long ago that in a world built for giants, the only way to survive was to be invisible. For 3 years, she had mastered the art of being a ghost in the machine of high society, scrubbing floors, polishing silver, and serving drinks to people who looked through her as if she were made of glass. Tonight, the Sterling Gala was the most important event of the season, a suffocating crush of tuxedos, designer gowns, and old money. Maya's legs were screaming in agony, a deep, throbbing ache that radiated from her shins to her hips, a constant, burning reminder of the life she had lost and the body that had been broken. Every step she took on the hard marble floor was a battle against pain. But she kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the floor, counting the minutes until she could take off the cheap, supportive sneakers she was forced to wear. She wasn't just tired. She was hollowed out, a shell of the woman she used to be, surviving on minimum wage and the desperate hope that her past would stay buried. The air in the ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and entitlement, a cloying mix that made her stomach turn. She navigated the crowd with the precision of a soldier behind enemy lines, knowing that one wrong move, one spilled drop, could cost her the rent money she desperately needed. But in a room this crowded, disaster is often just a matter of geometry. As Maya turned near the orchestra pit, balancing a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal flutes, a young debutante in a sprawling ball gown took a step backward without looking, focused entirely on perfecting her selfie angle. The collision was violent and unavoidable. The heavy silk of the girl's dress tangled with Maya's legs, and for a terrifying second, Maya felt that old, familiar instability in her ankles, the weakness that the doctors said would never go away. She tried to correct her balance, her muscles firing in a desperate attempt to save the tray, but it was too late. Gravity won. The tray tipped, and the crash was deafening. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Maya fell to her knees, the glass slicing into her palms, the cold champagne soaking through her uniform. She didn't look up. She couldn't. She just stared at the devastation, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird waiting for the shouting to start. She didn't care about the cut on her hand. She cared about the humiliation burning her cheeks, the feeling of 200 pairs of eyes judging her, stripping her of her humanity before a single word was spoken. Alistair Sterling didn't rush over to help. He didn't check on the young girl who had caused the accident. He descended upon Maya like a predator sensing a wounded animal. He walked slowly, letting the click of his dress shoes on the marble amplify the tension. He stood over her, casting a long, dark shadow that seemed to swallow her whole. "Look at this," he announced to the room, sweeping his arm wide as if presenting an art exhibit. "This is what happens when we lower our standards. This is what happens when we let the help forget their place." He crouched down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to hers, the smell of aged whiskey and mint on his breath making her flinch. "You didn't just break glasses," he whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear. "You broke the mood. You insulted my guests. You are a blight on this evening." The crowd tittered nervously, some looking away in discomfort, others watching with a morbid fascination. Alistair stood up, his voice rising to a theatrical boom. "I could fire you. I could have security throw you in the alley. But that feels too easy. You've taken up space in my world, so now you have to pay rent. Let's see if there's anything of value inside that uniform, or if you're just as broken as this glass." The cruelty of the wager hung in the air like a toxic cloud, thick and suffocating. Alistair turned and beckoned to a woman standing near the VIP section, Elena, his fiancée. She was a woman carved from ice and ambition, wearing a dress that cost more than Maya would earn in a decade. She stepped forward with a practiced, predatory smile, smoothing her hair as if she were about to accept an award. "Oh, Alistair, really?" Elena drawled, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You want me to compete with—" That it hardly seems fair. She probably thinks a waltz is something you order at a drive-thru. The crowd erupted in laughter, a sharp, jagged sound that cut Maya deeper than the glass ever could. Alistair reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, rubber-banded roll of $100 bills. He tossed it onto the floor, the heavy thud echoing in the silence. It landed inches from Maya's knee, right in the puddle of champagne. $50,000, Alistair sneered. "And my son, Julian, a package deal. Dance, entertain us, and you leave a lady. Refuse, and I'll make sure you never work in this city again. I'll blacklist you so hard you won't be able to get a job scrubbing toilets in a subway station." Julian Sterling, Alistair's son, looked like he wanted to vomit. He was a quiet man, always living in the terrifying shadow of his father's ego. But tonight, the shame was too much to bear. He stepped out from the crowd, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Father, stop," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "This is insane. She's bleeding. Look at her hand. Just let her go." Alistair spun on his heel, his eyes flashing with a dangerous rage. "You speak when I tell you to speak, boy," Alistair roared, pointing a finger at his son's chest. "You are soft. That is why the board respects me and tolerates you. This isn't about cruelty. It's about standards. It's about excellence. If this woman has any dignity, she'll stand up and fight. If she doesn't, she deserves the gutter. Now stand down, or I will write you out of the will before the music starts." Julian froze, the threat paralyzing him. He looked at Maya, his eyes wide with apology and helplessness, silently begging her to just run, to just leave and save herself from the mockery. But Maya didn't run. Something in Alistair's voice, that specific tone of dismissal, that arrogance that assumed her worth was zero, sparked a memory she had suppressed for 15 years. It wasn't a memory of cleaning. It was a memory of a stage in Vienna, of blinding lights, of a conductor raising his baton, of a body that could fly. She looked at the money soaking in the champagne. She looked at Elena's sneering face. She looked at the crowd, waiting for her to crumble. Slowly, agonizingly, Maya pushed herself up from the floor. Her knees popped. Her legs screamed in protest. She wiped her bloody palm on her gray apron, leaving a streak of crimson against the dull fabric. She stood up straight, her chin lifting, her spine elongating in a way that suddenly made her look taller than anyone else in the room. "I accept," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a steely resonance that silenced the laughter instantly. "But the money isn't enough. When I win, not if, when, I want you to apologize. Into a microphone, I want you to admit that you were wrong to judge a human being by their uniform." The room gasped. Alistair blinked, momentarily stunned by her defiance, before a cruel grin spread across his face. "You want an apology?" he laughed. "Fine. You win, I apologize. You lose, you clean up this mess with your tongue. Deal?" Elena went first, and it was a masterclass in mediocrity masked by money. The orchestra struck up "The Blue Danube," a complex and sweeping waltz that demanded soul, but Elena gave it only mechanics. She moved across the floor with stiff, rehearsed steps, counting the beats under her breath, her eyes darting to her feet to make sure she didn't trip. She held her frame rigid, her smile plastered on like a mask, terrified of making a mistake. It was the dancing of someone who had paid thousands of dollars for lessons, but had never felt a single note of music in her heart. She spun, but she didn't flow. She dipped, but she didn't soar. To the untrained eye of the wealthy elites, however, it looked acceptable. It looked proper. When she finished with a stiff curtsy, the room erupted in polite, enthusiastic applause. Alistair clapped the loudest, beaming with pride. "Perfection!" he shouted, glaring at Maya. "Absolute perfection! Top that, cleaner! Show us your mop moves!" Maya stepped into the center of the circle. The silence was heavy, thick with anticipation and mockery. She didn't look at the crowd. She closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply, and for a moment, she wasn't in a museum. She was back at the Royal Contemporary. She felt the ghost of the injury that had ended her career. The shattered tibia, the reconstructed ankle, throbbing in time with her heartbeat. The pain was excruciating, a sharp, hot knife in her legs. But she didn't push it away. She welcomed it. She used it. She signaled the conductor with a subtle nod, a gesture of command that made the old musician sit up straighter. The music began, the swelling strings filling the room. For the first 4 bars, Maya didn't move. She just stood there, letting the music wash over her, letting the rhythm sink with her pulse. The crowd started to whisper, thinking she had frozen. Alistair opened his mouth to jeer, and then Maya moved. It wasn't a step. It was an explosion of grace. She pushed off her bad leg, defying gravity, launching herself into a glissade that carried her halfway across the floor. She didn't wear satin point shoes. She wore worn-out rubber-soled work sneakers. Yet she moved with a lightness that made her seem weightless. Her gray apron flared out like a couture gown as she spun, her arms extending in a line so pure and fluid it brought tears to the eyes of the musicians. She attacked the floor, spinning into a series of rapid-fire fouettes, turns so fast and precise that they blurred the air around her. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic squeak of her rubber soles against the marble and the collective gasp of 200 people realizing they were wrong. The pain in her legs was blinding, white-hot agony, but she smiled, a fierce, triumphant smile. She saw Alistair's jaw drop. She saw the glass slip from his fingers and shatter, unnoticed. As the music reached its thunderous crescendo, Maya threw her head back and dropped into a deep, dramatic lunge. her hand extended toward the ceiling, holding the final pose as the last note vibrated in the air. For 3 seconds, the room was dead silent. No one breathed. No one moved. The image of the woman in the stained gray uniform, chest heaving, sweat glistening on her forehead, looking like a queen amidst the ruins of the party, was too powerful to process immediately. Then, from the back of the room, a single person started clapping. It was Elias, the head of security. "I know who you are!" Elias shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "That is Maya the Swan Brooks. She was the principal soloist at the Royal Contemporary before the accident. You just tried to hustle a legend, Mr. Sterling." The whisper turned into a roar. The applause started, tentative at first, then exploding into a thunderous ovation. Guests were standing on chairs to get a better look. Phones were out, recording the moment. Alistair stood frozen, his face a mask of ash and terror. He looked at Elena, who was backing away, humiliated. He looked at the crowd, who had turned on him instantly. Maya stood up slowly, the adrenaline fading, the pain returning tenfold. She walked straight up to Alistair. She didn't bow. She didn't curate her tone. She looked him dead in the eye. "Apologize," she said. It wasn't a request. Alistair looked for an escape, but he was boxed in. Julian, his son, stepped forward, his face hard. "Do it, father," Julian said, his voice ringing clear, "or I call the board members right now and tell them how you treat the staff." Alistair, cornered and broken by his own hubris, leaned toward the microphone. He choked on the words. "I apologize. I was wrong." It was weak, it was pathetic, but it was public. Maya looked at him with pity, not anger. "I don't want your money," she said, loud enough for the cameras. "And I don't want your son. I just want you to know that you can't buy class, and you certainly can't buy talent." She took off her apron, folded it neatly, and dropped it at his feet. "I quit." The video hit the internet before Maya even got to the bus stop. By the next morning, the maid who danced was the #1 trending topic in the world. The fallout was catastrophic for Alistair. The Sterling Museum Board, terrified of the PR nightmare, forced him to resign within 48 hours. His reputation was incinerated. Julian Sterling took over the family trust and immediately redirected millions into arts scholarships for underprivileged dancers, naming the first grant after Maya. And Maya, she never went back to cleaning. The viral fame didn't fix her legs, but it fixed her life. She opened a dance studio in the city, fully funded by donations from around the world. She taught young girls who looked like her, girls who had been told they were too poor or too broken to dance. She stood at the front of her studio, leaning on a cane, watching a new generation soar, knowing that the best revenge wasn't destroying Alistair Sterling. It was proving that no matter how hard the world tries to bury you, talent always finds a way to rise.